everybody! Buckle your seatbelt and power up your oscillators because today we're hopping straight into the electrifying world of synthesizers. From room-sized machines to the portable icons that shaped whole genres, we're about to trace the wild, wiggly waveforms of music history. So let's plug in and hop to it. So, question time. When you think of the synthesizer, what pops into your mind? If you're like most folks, you probably picture an electric piano, right? But get this, does a synthesizer have to be a keyboard instrument? Not at all. A synthesizer is any machine that electronically synthesizes waveforms and frequencies. And the way we control those waveforms, oh my whiskers, it can be done with practically any interface. What's often considered the very first official synthesizer, way back in the 1950s, was basically a giant room-sized computer that you programmed with hole-punched paper tape. You couldn't even play it live. And no speakers, just a hulking machine humming away, running on vacuum tubes. Talk about a prototype. Now let's hop into the 1950s. The Radio Corporation of America, RCA, was huge. They were single-handedly shaping American radio, television, and sound recording. Because they were so big in entertainment tech, they had a massive influence on how sound recording evolved. But here's the kicker. Making acoustic music for TV and radio was getting expensive. So RCA said, what if we analyzed thousands of pop songs and figured out what makes a hit a hit? Their plan? Auto-generate popular tunes and skip hiring composers and session musicians. Instant music, straight from machine to disc. No retakes, no studio time. I mean, with all the chatter about AI right now, we're basically having the exact same arguments all over again. Yikes. Enter Harry F. Olson, RCA's top acoustics expert, and engineer Herbert Ballar. Together, they created the Mark I, an electric sound synthesis machine. Picture this, a room-sized analog computer with 12 vacuum tube oscillators, one for each tone of the Western scale. And those tones, they could be shaped in limitless ways using high-pass filters, low-pass filters, envelope generators, modulators, resonators, you name it. Speaking of filters, a filter is basically any tool that manipulates a signal. It's like a super smart strainer, only for sound. Filters let you pick a specific range of frequencies and then boost or quiet that range, totally changing the shape of the waveform and how the sound feels. That's how you make a sound muffled, bright, squishy, sparkly, whatever vibe you want. The Mark I made its big debut in January 1955. To, quote, play it, you punched holes into a long roll of paper, kind of like a player piano roll, using a typewriter-style keyboard. Those holes told the machine what notes to play and how to shape them. Then you had over 250 manual controls to set all the extra parameters. Once the paper went in, the machine read it and cut the resulting sound straight into a gramophone disc. No real-time performance, just pre-programmed music. But it worked well enough that RCA made the Mark II, which had 24 adjustable oscillators and gave composers even more freedom. But here's where things get messy. RCA spent $500,000 on the project. Huge money back then. And they realized it took one programmer 4 weeks to input just a few minutes of music. So they said, nope, and handed the machine over to the Columbia-Princeton Electronic Music Center. And guess what? The experimental composers there loved it. These composers were seriously pushing the boundaries of 12-tone music, and they totally embraced the Mark II's complexity, its weird non-musical interface, and its endless possibilities for sound wave creation. Now, hop with me to 1963. On opposite coasts of the U.S., two brilliant inventors, Robert Moog in New York and Don Buchla in San Francisco, were unknowingly creating the first commercial modular synthesizers. These were way smaller than the RCA beasts thanks to cheap transistors. In 1957, a box of 30 transistors cost $1,000. But by 1964, they were just 25 cents each. Talk about a price drop. Now, a transistor is a semiconductor that controls the flow of electricity. And because of its exponential input to output relationship, tiny voltage changes can create huge changes in current. And that's called gain. And it's what made control voltage possible, one of the most important features of Moog and Buchla's synths. Each module in these systems was voltage controlled. That meant the output of one module could be fed into another. For example, route the slow beat of one oscillator into another, and boom, vibrato. Control voltage was basically the language these modules used to talk to each other. Modular synthesis has two big parts: sound sources, or oscillators, and sound modifiers, like filters, LFOs, envelope shapers, amplifiers. The oscillators generate the sound, and the modifiers shape it. The sound is always running as long as the synth is on. It's the amplifier that decides whether you can actually hear it. Voltage control changed everything. Instead of weeks of programming like the RCA machines, musicians could finally play synthesizers in real time. And by 1971, Moog released the Mini Moog, a portable synth that became iconic in the 70s and 80s across rock, jazz, reggae, basically everywhere. Now here's where things get spicy. Moog and Buchla both made modular voltage-controlled synths in 1964, but their philosophies were totally different. Buchla's West Coast design used additive synthesis, building sounds by adding waveforms together. Moog's East Coast design used subtractive synthesis, starting with rich waveforms and filtering things out. Additive synthesis gave artists insane amounts of control. Subtractive was simpler and more accessible, and that's partly why Moog became a household name while Buchla stayed more niche. Both designs reflected their cultural environments. San Francisco in the 60s was all about counterculture, experimentation, expanded consciousness. Perfect for Buchla's otherworldly machines and sounds. Meanwhile, New York was dealing with labor strikes, political upheaval, and a more practical, efficiency-driven mindset. Very Moog. Moog already had a business selling theremin kits with his dad. And by 1963, he had a shop in Trumansburg, New York, making amplifier kits. In 1964, the first Moog synth sounds drifted out of his basement, confusing everyone walking by. He thought the project was just a fun side thing, until electronic composers started placing custom orders. In 1967, Moog decided to sell his units as complete systems, setting himself up for mass production. Still, these early synths cost a whopping $10,000 each, so they were mostly used in studios or by wealthy folks. Moog once said, "More than me, Buchla has his own musical vision." And wow, does that show in their controllers. Moog's assistant, John Weiss, said Buchla's designs were wild and wonderful, bizarre things he designed while he was high. Moog's, on the other hand, were conservative, rigorous, and well-controlled. Buchla refused to use a traditional keyboard. He thought it psychologically trapped musicians in old habits, so he made touch-sensitive pads, super futuristic like early versions of the tech we use today. Moog, on the other hand, knew that people needed something familiar, so he attached a keyboard, making the synth instantly recognizable as a musical instrument. After all, earlier synthesizers were mostly being used by experimentalists, and people had trouble understanding that a wall of patch cables was an instrument for making music. Seeing a familiar keyboard attached to it helped people get it. And honestly, that decision helped synths go mainstream. Limiting options sometimes makes tech more accessible. But Buchla's artistic point is important too. A 12-tone keyboard reinforces old Western pitch systems. Even though a Moog can make any pitch, the keyboard nudges you back into those old patterns. We can see this contrast in two early landmark recordings. In 1967, Mort Subotnick released Silver Apples of the Moon made on a Buchla synth. It was psychedelic, groundbreaking, but not mainstream. In 1968, Wendy Carlos released Switched on Bach, made on a Moog. It was a massive hit. First classical album to go platinum in the US, 3 Grammys. It brought synthesizers into the mainstream. And Wendy Carlos would go on to craft the epic electronic soundtracks for movies like A Clockwork Orange, The Shining, and even Disney's super glowy 1982 Tron. The success of Switched on Bach helped Carlos afford gender-confirming surgery in 1972, but she had to release music under Walter Carlos for years due to public pressure. She didn't publicly reveal her identity until 1979 Playboy interview, and her 15th album in 1984 was the first one released under the name Wendy Carlos. Robert Moog remembered playing a track from Switched on Bach at an Audio Engineering Society meeting before the album dropped. He said the engineers' jaws literally dropped, and some even teared up. That's how revolutionary it sounded. And in the end, the public decided which approach would define the synthesizer as a mainstream instrument. The Moog, with its familiar keyboard and simpler accessible design, became the synth that shaped modern music. What a journey, right? From room-sized, paper-programmed giants to portable synths that shape entire genres. Isn't history amazing when you see how it leads right into the tech we use today? All right, my fluffy friends, who's ready to make some waveforms? Until next time, stay curious, stay creative, and keep those bunny ears tuned for more musical magic.